Hey everybody, my name is Matthew Sambanis. I'm a certified public accountant. My firm is based in Long Island, New York, and my YouTube video channel is dedicated to economics, finance, making money, making investments, gold, silver, foreign stocks, commodities, and other things of that nature. So if that's your interest, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And in today's video, we are going to discuss the current state of the U.S. economy, the enormous deficits that are happening right now, what we can do to profit, and ultimately the ultimate collapse. I hate to be dramatic or dramatic sounding, but the ultimate collapse of America, because the cycle that we're on can't keep on happening. We can't keep on doing what we've been doing. So I have a lot of notes in front of me. I'm going to try to make this as short and concise as possible. Please be sure to stay to the end. I'd greatly appreciate it. And without further ado, let's get rocking and rolling. So first thing I want to point out is that the U.S. government has the biggest government in the history of the world, right? I mean, bigger than China, which is a much bigger country than us, with a much larger population, bigger than India, which is a much larger country than us, bigger, and a much larger population than us. And it gets bigger. It gets bigger and bigger every year, and our revenues don't support it, right? We don't have enough tax revenue coming in to support the current U.S. government, and therefore we're running at a deficit, right? That's why we have all this debt, 34 trillion and counting, and it keeps on going up and up, and interest payments that continue to go up and up. And there's one issue, not one issue, but the main issue, the culprit of that is our politicians are never going to agree to reduce the size of the federal government, right? And not only do they not want to reduce the size of the government and get rid of inefficient jobs, they don't want to cut any social programs, any welfare programs, nor do they want to cut any jobs. They don't want to cut their salaries, and they don't want to stop sending money abroad, a whole litany of stuff. And they just keep on getting bigger and bigger and drunk on their size and drunk on their power. And to put it in proper perspective, approximately 3 million people work directly for the federal government. 3 million people. There's about 132 million Americans who work, and 3 million work directly for the government. I mean, if you divide that out by 50, that's, for all 50 states, that's a huge number and a huge issue. And that doesn't include state governments and other type of governmental entities as well. And it's a problem, and there's not enough taxpayers to support it. And the issue is that the money that the government employees generate doesn't actually exist, right? So when you have an employee, you have to pay FICA, which is Social Security and Medicare. The employee pays half, 7.5%, and the employer pays 7.5%. But the government doesn't actually generate money. So when they match their employees, they just create the money out of thin air, which is causing inflation. The federal government in 2023 spent $6.13 trillion, which is larger than the GDP of every nation in the entire country except for the U.S. and China. The offset to that is we only collected about $4 trillion in revenue, so that's the deficit that they're talking about. And the deficits continue to get worse and worse. 40% of the money that was printed today in existence was in the last 3 to 4 years since COVID hit. That's why the stock market keeps on going up and doesn't ever seem to go down. More than 70 million Americans are on Social Security, right? More than 65 million Americans are on Medicare. 81 million Americans are on Medicaid. And, that is, there's 332 million Americans. 81 million, almost a third, is on Medicaid, which is sad. It's a shame. We're supposed to be the richest, most populous, opportunity-driven country in the world, and we have, 81 million people on Medicaid, and 41 million Americans are on food stamps. Out of 132 million Americans who are working, 41 million are on food stamps. I mean, that's travesty, and that's sad. And that doesn't include the amount of debt that the average citizen has been taking on and continues to, sink underwater. But if you also look at all of these numbers here, what does that really kind of equate to? We're supposed to be a capitalist country, right? We're supposed to be a capitalist country, but When you have this many people working for the government, you have this many people on welfare, it's really almost like a socialist country. It's not what America was built on. So, the issue is that we can't provide enough money to keep it going. The federal government has been piling up insane amounts of debts. And to be exact, in 1980, the national debt was $1 trillion. It's now $34 trillion. That doesn't account for unfunded liabilities, by the way. So the amount of debt that we have is not sustainable. And yes, we have the current world reserve currency, but that's only going to last for so long because our currency is going to be devalued hugely. I mean, how could it not be, right? Logically. And finally, a 2023 Pew Research Center survey found that 57% of Americans said reducing the budget deficit should be a top priority for the president and Congress, up from 45% the prior year. So people are becoming hip to this stuff. But when you hear 6 trillion, 4 trillion, 34 trillion, you hear 16 trillion student debts, what is it? I think 12 trillion in credit card debts, another 8 trillion, I believe, in automobile debts. The numbers are so big that it's hard for people to actually process it and understand the depth of the issues that we're facing. Excuse me. And the politicians in Washington, they're not going to control their spending. And if we had to live within our means, we would be in a severe depression. We would be in a depression beyond depressions, which is what we need, by the way. In my humble opinion, we need to have a depression. Everything needs to get cleansed out. We have to default on our national debt. People who need to go bankrupt, and we have to have a cleansing, and we have to start from scrap. Because that's where we're not even at scrap anymore. We're at negative 50, right? I mean, if you take the debt, you add everything up, where here's zero, you're in the negative, so going to zero would be a step up from negative, and that's what we need. And the size, to continue on and just to continue to hammer this home, because we're leading up to this, the fact is the size of the federal deficit in December was 52% larger than than the year earlier, right? Meaning the federal government posted $129 billion deficit in December, up $44 billion or 52% from a year earlier, as outlays rose while receipts fell from December 22 levels that were swelled by pandemic deferred tax payments. So the end answer here is America's empire of money, which used to be gold, and had we stuck to the gold standard, we'd be very well off, which we obviously didn't and can't. This is out of control, and it's going to lead to a collapse. That's it. And, they're talking about 2% inflation. They're talking about this. They're talking about that. But ultimately, everybody's pretending as if everything is A-okay, and it's not. So, by the way, if you're enjoying this, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If I'm missing anything, tell me. I greatly appreciate your input. I reply to all the comments. And, another bullet point is Bidenomics, right? And Bidenomics has been driven by debt, massive auto loans, massive student loans, massive credit card debt, massive amounts of mortgage debts, massive amounts of people not paying their mortgages. And Bidenomics has been a nightmare. And how do you know? And how do I know? Go to the supermarket. What are you really paying? You're paying more, 2-3 times more than you used to 2 to 3 years ago, where everything's doubled. Go to Home Depot. A vat of Rockwool used to be $30. It's now $80. Can you go get a used car? No. When I first started driving in 1999 and 2000, I used to, I went through 10, 15, 20, $1,500 cars, right? I never had the money. Both my parents claimed bankruptcy. So whatever, I could scrounge up whatever I could scrounge up. And, ultimately, obviously now, light years away from that. But back then you could go buy a decent $1,500 car, granted whatever. Anyway, so You can't do that anymore. That 1,500 20 years ago is now 15,000. Bear with me. All right. So the other thing I want to point out is that for December alone, the deficit was $500 billion. So U.S. deficits, and now we're on a CNBC article / bullet points. U.S. deficit tops $500 billion in the first quarter of fiscal year. So the U.S.'s fiscal year starts in October. So it's October, November, December. $500 billion in the hole. I mean, you can't even make that up. The deficit has continued to pile up despite the Biden administration's assurance that the Inflation Reduction Act, in addition to reducing prices, would shave hundreds of billions off the deficit. All right, well, when the government comes out and says they're going to do something and they name it something like Inflation Reduction Act, that means they are going to increase inflation. Anything they do, any of these fancy titles they give to any of their bills, just assume it does the opposite. So while the rate of inflation has come down, Labor Department data showed the consumer price index increased another 0.3% in December, pushing 12-month rate up to 3.4%, higher than Wall Street's consensus and above the Federal Reserve's 2% goal. So I don't want to go off on a side note on a tangent on inflation, but you have the Inflation Reduction Act. And, the Federal Reserve's goal is now 2%. But if you remember a bunch of years ago, it was to average 2%. Now it's 2%. So the fact that we had 20% inflation for 3 years straight, probably 60% or probably 33% if we're going to be honest and sincere, is just a joke. And, the other issue now is from 2001 through 2022, interest rates have been super low. Now they're not super low. So the debt, used to cost us about $500 billion a year, I believe, in 2019, and now it's going to be costing us over $1 trillion a year to service just the national debt. So long story short, I have a whole bunch of other notes I could go through. I'm not going to. I want to get to the meat and the potatoes of this as well, which is basically if you've followed this, you know that we can't continue this. We're not on a sustainable path. If the government were a business, if the government were an individual, they would have to go bankrupt, right? The difference is that a business and individuals don't have the printing press, and therefore they can't print their way out of debt. But what happens when you do print your way out of debt? Inflation. And eventually your money becomes worthless, just like what happened in Venezuela, just like I believe also happened in Turkey. So buy gold, buy silver, buy physical gold, buy physical silver. And this is just my opinion. I'm not an investment advisor. I'm an accountant, and this is not a client relationship. So do the opposite of what I'm doing if you want. But what I'm personally doing is I'm buying physical silver. I'm buying physical gold. I'm buying commodities. I'm buying stocks abroad. I'm buying dividend-paying stocks that are able to raise their prices and keep up with inflation. And, I've been buying other physical assets as well. But basically, the answer is that we can't continue. And empires have fallen before. They're going to continue to fall. The U.S. empire, unless we get our act straightened out somehow, is going to fall, right? I don't know when. Might be 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Might be after my lifetime. I don't know. But we can't keep on keeping on. So if you found this helpful, please like, comment, subscribe. If I missed anything, please leave a comment. I'd greatly, greatly appreciate it. And have a great day.